Well, welcome back, everybody. Bienvenue, mesdames et messieurs. I hope you enjoyed your brief bio break, or as we call it in our house, your reprieve to relieve. It's great to have you all back with us. Thank you for your patience. And you know what? I think we should take a moment to celebrate the fact that we and you members of FCM are so frankly incredible and wonderful and well organized that we are actually ahead of schedule. How often does that happen? So take a second to celebrate that. In the meantime, I am going to throw things back now to Joanne Vanderheyden, First Vice President. So Joanne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I really want to go back and say thank you once again to Barry for all the work he's doing on the election committee. And thanks again to our candidates for First Vice President. Surveille commune de rente de la FCM est une responsable importante et un grand privilège. En tant que première vice-présidente actuelle, c'est maintenant mon privilège de vous présenter notre deuxième conférencier politique. My friends, I am honored to introduce our second political keynote speaker, the Honourable Erin O'Toole. We all know Erin O'Toole as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada and leader of Canada's official opposition. He was elected leader last August after serving as shadow minister for foreign affairs. Mr. O'Toole was also Minister of Veterans Affairs in the previous Conservative government. He's had careers in law and military, and since 2012, he's served as Member of Parliament for Durham, Ontario. Durham has something in common with my own community of Strathroy-Caradoc, with our strong rural heartland, and some vibrant urban elements as well. These are good places for national leaders to come from. Of course, Mr. O'Toole's Conservative Party has had a track record of working with FCM and with municipalities of all sizes. This is the party that made the gas tax fund a permanent tool for municipalities, because we're the ones on the front lines delivering solutions to people's real daily challenges. And doing more to unlock that potential will be critical as we work together to move Canada forward from this pandemic. La discussion d'aujourd'hui est donc très importante. Alors, commençons la discussion sans tarder avec notre invité. Mes amis, je vous prie d'accueillir le chef de Parti conservateur du Canada. Friends, please welcome the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, the Honourable Erin O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Joanne. To begin, this week, Canadians are grieving after learning of the remains of 215 residential school children being uncovered in a mass grave in Kamloops. This is a heartbreaking reminder of the pain Indigenous children, their families, and their communities have been subjected to throughout the residential school history. I saw the FCM's statement today. Thank you. Yesterday, I wrote to the Prime Minister asking for Canada to take quick action on implementing calls to action 71 through 76 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This isn't a partisan issue. As I said to Mr. Trudeau, we can and we must work together to ensure we bring our dark history to light, acknowledge it, learn from it, and ensure nothing like it ever happens again. So as FCM's new president, my team and myself are looking forward to working with you in Strathroy, in Durham, and in all parts of this great country. I know that as a mentor to young people, a longtime volunteer, and the mayor in your community, you will do an outstanding job. And it is great to join you virtually to share the Conservative vision for the economic recovery of Canadian communities as we move forward from the pandemic. And it's great to see my friend Catherine Clark, who is an exceptional host of many virtual conventions these days. Municipalities, as you all know as leaders, among the hardest hit by COVID-19. Normal sources of revenue collapsed, while expenses went through the roof. You each play a vital role in the safe reopening, and you have throughout this crisis. So thank you for your leadership at the municipal level in communities large and small across this country. As leader of the opposition, I have a job to do holding the Liberal government to account. With high COVID cases throughout the winter and spring and tight restrictions across the country, We were all frustrated to see Canada fall behind many of our peer countries in vaccine deployment, with only 4% of Canadians having been fully vaccinated. Autrefois, le Canada était un leader. Nous étions des champions. Mais sous M. Trudeau, nous sommes maintenant à la dernière place. Que ce soit pour les vaccins, les tests de dépistage rapide, les investissements ou la compétitivité chaque année, nous prenons de plus en plus de retard. Canada deserves better. We need to see the return of Canadian optimism and Canadian ingenuity. But most of all, we need to see the return of Canadian leadership. Leadership for the well-being of our citizens. Leadership for our shared economic prosperity. Leadership to bring unity to this great country. Because the future of Canada post-COVID-19 is truly at stake. Our country is at a crossroads, and soon Canadians will have to decide which path they want our country to take. The path of more of the same from the Liberal government and the other parties that are supporting them, more big deficits, more debt, more taxes and less opportunity? Or will Canadians choose the steady and certain path to securing our future? A path that will deliver us a Canada where those who've struggled the most through this pandemic can get back to work. This spring, I introduced Canada's Recovery Plan, a plan to secure our future. Canada's Conservatives will enact a comprehensive jobs plan to recover the 1 million jobs lost during the pandemic. We're confident we can reach that target within 1 year. Currently, 1 in 6 small business owners across Canada are seriously contemplating permanent closure. To avoid these closures, we will take immediate action to help those who've suffered the most, including small business owners, women, and young people. We will rebuild the main streets of Canada by assisting small businesses and providing incentives to invest in, rebuild, or even start new businesses. Fast and reliable internet is critical to the recovery of Canadian municipalities and for the education, employment, healthcare, and connection needs of families and small businesses from coast to coast. This is not a luxury we can afford to live without. Pour les conservateurs, l'accès à Internet haute vitesse est une priorité. Nous allons avoir un plan pour simplifier et rationaliser le processus d'approbation. Cela va permettre d'augmenter la capacité de réseau pour les municipalités rurales. Vous avez besoin d'un gouvernement qui va vous soutenir, d'un gouvernement qui s'engage à faire des communautés canadiennes de meilleurs endroits pour travailler et vivre. The second pillar of our plan will enact the toughest accountability and transparency laws in Canadian history. From the Prime Minister's office himself to countless chiefs of defense staff in our military, Canadians want accountability, transparency, and trust restored. We owe it to reestablish faith of Canadians in their federal institutions. Third, last year has deepened Canada's mental health crisis. We will introduce a Canada Mental Health Action Plan and boost funding partnerships with the provinces and with nonprofit groups on the ground for mental wellness and mental care. The great news out of Manitoba, for example, where 5 mental health hubs for youth are opening up. This is the exact type of partnerships we will strive to support. And we will also create a nationwide 3-digit suicide prevention hotline so that help is available everywhere in Canada. Our action for mental health must also include combating homelessness. We will champion the work nonprofits are already doing, including Habitat for Humanity, many branches of the Royal Canadian Legion, service clubs, faith-based groups, and more. We will partner with other levels of government and other partners to accelerate opportunities so we can move more Canadians from shelters to stable long-term housing. Fourth, I will ensure our country is never unprepared for a crisis again. Canada's Conservatives will make our country more resilient, reduce our reliance on countries like Communist China, and take our responsibility seriously to protect the health of Canadians. This includes enhancing domestic capacity in vaccines and other critical medicines. Finally, a Conservative government will secure Canada's economy by getting the budget back to balance over the course of the next decade. Spending to protect Canadians during the pandemic is the right thing to do, and Conservatives have supported that in opposition. But I'm sure we all know that we can't pass unsustainable debt levels to our children and to future generations. Liberals recently released their pre-election budget. The spending in that budget is so astronomical that it puts the future of our country at risk. It puts growth at risk, jobs at risk. It puts healthcare at risk and local economies at risk. Le Premier ministre a proposé un plan d'endettement hors de contrôle et sans stimulus. Son plan abandonne le secteur des ressources naturelles. Il n'a pas de point d'ancrage fiscal non plus. Nous ne pouvons plus nous permettre de voir les mêmes erreurs des libéraux et leurs partenaires, l'NPD et le Bloc. Their Ottawa knows best approach that we see constantly from the Trudeau government will continue to lead to ballooning housing costs, higher taxes, growing risk of inflation, fewer partnerships with other orders of government, and will increasingly leave millions of Canadians behind. Once the recovery starts, a Conservative government will get spending under control, and we will get the economy growing again to secure the revenue needed to pay for the government services Canadians depend on. Increasing Canada's housing supply is a critical part of this recovery. Building more homes is the only long-term sustainable solution to making housing more affordable for Canadians. We know that building new homes creates a ripple effect for the local community, generating jobs and stimulating the economy. We are looking at ways to encourage and partner with provinces and municipalities to cut the red tape and delays that can, in many cases, add so much to the cost of a new home. We also want to create incentives for communities to build housing where people live and commute. We can work together, governments at all levels and the private sector, to make it attractive to invest in rental housing and have a real plan for housing cooperatives. Recently, I was also proud to release the Conservative plan for climate change and the environment. The Liberal approach to climate change has meant big government taxing consumers and actually phasing out jobs when we need them the most. The Conservative approach will empower Canadians and reduce emissions while preserving jobs and economic activity in all sectors and all regions. In fact, we had climate experts verify that the Conservative climate change plan will achieve the same emission reductions as the Liberal government's current plan, but will vastly outstrip their plan when it comes to growing jobs and the economy. Les municipalités sont en première ligne pour protéger l'environnement. Les conservateurs veulent s'associer à vous. C'est terminer les solutions imposées d'en haut. C'est la même chose pour les infrastructures. Je crois que la plupart des décisions peuvent et doivent être prises localement. The parliamentary budget officer said that the Liberals' infrastructure plan, quote, does not exist, end quote. 1/3 of the funding allocated for infrastructure over the last 4 years went unspent. We don't need more announcements and photo ops with no follow through. You need an actual plan to build roads, bridges, ports, airports, and other critical local infrastructure needs to get the country moving. That's why our government will get infrastructure dollars out the door and make smart investments that boost the economic potential of Canadian municipalities. And Joanne said, our track record is clear. We will leverage the certainty of the gas tax fund that we locked in to ensure more options for predictable and stable funding for partners at the municipal level. And we will work with you on mass transit and other major projects. The decisions we take in the next few years will define Canada for this generation and the next. As the father of 2 young kids, my greatest worry is failing to leave them a better Canada. That's what drives me, and I know it's what drives you as leaders in your community. It's why I sought public office in the first place, and I'm sure that's the reason that drives most of you. It's why I want to thank you for this opportunity. Every day I'm telling Canadians about the vision Conservatives have for a stronger, more prosperous, and more united Canada. As we recover from COVID-19, it's time for certainty, ethical, and competent leadership. It's time for us to be champions again for unity, for excellence, and a prosperous future. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur O'Toole. Merci d'avoir pris le temps de partager votre version avec nous aujourd'hui. It is really an honor to be hosting a full slate of national leaders at this conference. Our long-term dialogue with the Conservative Party in opposition and in government is very important to FCM. So thank you, Mr. O'Toole, for sharing more of your vision for moving Canada forward beyond COVID-19. And thank you as well for sticking around to answer some of our questions and having a conversation. So right off the top, I'll start with broadband internet, because the pandemic has really exposed Canada's digital divide. We know that millions of Canadians turned into the internet to connect with work, school, customers, support networks. But in many rural and remote communities, that just wasn't possible. And that high-speed internet access gap is holding back people, communities, and our whole economy. We're certainly making progress. FCM has helped secure and shape major new federal investment in broadband, and we'll be working hard to turn that into real infrastructure. But there's much more to do. And building on what you've said, I'd love to hear you sum up your vision to achieve truly universal internet access in Canada.
Thank you, Joanne. The digital divide was already there before COVID, but this pandemic exposed that divide so plainly for all communities. Small business owners, families trying to educate children, people trying to stay in touch at a time of isolation. There was a clear difference between urban, suburban Canada and many parts of rural Canada, and of course, northern and Indigenous communities. We've held the line on the government on this because what's been disappointing, at a time where $500 billion went out the door with very little oversight, we were trying to maximize the impact of these support programs, but we wanted to help people. Do you know the government actually canceled some programs for extension of broadband high-speed access to Indigenous communities? We highlighted that in our questioning of the government. There are 7 different programs within the federal government, all targeting the expansion of broadband access to rural and remote communities. How can you have a prioritization of your approach as a government if you have 7 different programs within agencies and ministries of the government? We've got a big, bureaucratic, and slow government led by a prime minister who loves the announcements. He's very good at those. He's very poor at following up. That's where I will come in. My background in the private sector, in the military, but also as minister. When I was a minister, I had to turn around a department that had lawsuits, wait times, was losing trust of veterans. I brought in a team, a mission statement, and we tackled the problems and delivered for Canadians. That's why I'm in public life. That is my track record before politics and in it. And I'm looking for partners because I want to use the opportunity coming out of COVID to accelerate the high-speed internet deployment, the broadband deployment from coast to coast to coast. And I look forward to partnering with municipalities, Indigenous communities, often seeing if they can help take the lead on some of the deployment.
Merci, Monsieur O'Toole. Passons maintenant de haute vitesse à une autre grande priorité de la FCM, la politique et matière de climat. Our communities are on the front lines of new climate extremes. The flooding, the wildfires, the melting permafrost. These are real threats to homes and businesses, and local leaders are working very hard, making our communities more resilient. We're also actively reducing emissions in ways that create jobs and improve quality of life, from building greener transit to supporting cost-saving building and home retrofits. In fact, for any federal government, investing to scale up local action is one of the most reliable, cost-effective ways to achieve national climate objectives. So reflecting on your party's recently released climate plan, what role do you see for municipalities in achieving national climate objectives?
Merci pour la question, Joanne. Les municipalités, les autres piliers du gouvernement méritent un partenaire, pas une paternaliste, sur tous les enjeux importants, incluant les changements climatiques. C'est pourquoi, en mars, j'ai lancé notre politique sur les changements climatiques, une politique sérieuse et ciblée sur une réduction des émissions. It's a priority for us, which is why I'm proud that we launched the most comprehensive pre-campaign policy in political history in Canada, was our climate change policy that was released. Not the two-page bullet point approach Mr. Trudeau presented in 2015. We worked with the top climate modeling firm in the country to come up with a plan that will meet our Paris targets, but minimize the economic disruption that this will have on the Canadian economy as we meet those important objectives. It puts a consumer price on carbon, works with large emitters, really partners on EV deployment and other key technologies, introduces a renewable component to natural gas, and looks at natural climate solutions and potential partnerships with all orders of government. One thing that we want to make crystal clear is if municipalities, if certain industries like forestry, if provinces have innovations, have plans to reduce our emissions, why would we not partner? The Ottawa knows it best approach that we constantly have seen in the last 6 years is actually leading to discord in our federation. It's actually not meeting any of the objectives. In fact, Mr. Trudeau has never made a climate change objective. He's never made a boil watery commitment to Indigenous communities. He's never made a budgetary commitment or a deficit commitment made to Canadians. Canadians deserve a little bit more than someone who has great words and no plan. So I look forward to partnering, whether on transit, whether on some of the innovations, including hydrogen as well, that Alberta, Ontario, and other provinces are looking at. This is an area where we need an all-hands-on-deck approach. So I put out a very comprehensive plan that I think gives a number of tools that some provinces are already adapting. I'd also like to see a made in Canada approach to net zero goals. That does not exist in the current legislation Mr. Trudeau is quietly trying to sit on and run out the clock on before the end of the parliamentary session. Why aren't there not key partnerships in that with municipal governments, with provincial governments, with large emitter sectors, whether in industry or agriculture? We need to partner so that we can minimize the challenges of meeting our objectives and maximizing getting emissions down. This is important to me as both a politician, but also a parent.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. O'Toole. I'll just end with a question that we're asking all the federal leaders. The pandemic has showcased the value of intergovernmental partnerships. We've touched on that a few times, especially the direct relationship between federal and local governments, from delivering frontline services to supporting Canadians facing homelessness. We couldn't be doing our part without federal support. The federal government has relied on our frontline action and expertise, and the pandemic shows we do well when we work together directly and with clear shared objectives. So my last question is this: how might an O'Toole Conservative government work with other orders of government to unlock more of the results-oriented expertise of local governments?
That's a great question to end with, Joanne. And I want to thank your members for their leadership throughout this crisis. I think as more Canadians get to know me, probably the biggest experience I took from my time in the military was to know the value of a team. You're not always the leader, you're not always the mayor, you're not always the prime minister or leader of the party, but you can be a member of a team, and teams can do incredible things. So I am not an Ottawa dictates the conditions type person. If there are great initiatives on the ground from a municipal government, from a provincial government, from a First Nation government, from a nonprofit, from an innovator, when can Ottawa sometimes partner with funding as opposed to dictating the terms of how we proceed together? Whether it's on affordable housing, whether it's on climate change, whether it's on response in the pandemic. I stopped my leadership race, offered to sit in a joint cabinet with the Liberals during the time of the COVID crisis, and worked directly with Premier Ford to bring a mask company that was manufacturing in China back to Ontario. I'm a roll-up-the-sleeves person, and right now I'm reaching out to unions that want jobs and certainty for their members, including on large infrastructure projects. I'll partner with you. Municipal levels, big cities, small towns, I'll partner with you because at the end of the day, a voter is a taxpayer. We need to make sure that we secure our future following COVID, and a Conservative government will look to partner for the well-being of our citizens.
Mr. O'Toole, thank you again very much for joining us today. We look forward to continuing these conversations with you and your entire team in the coming weeks and months ahead.
Thank you very much.
Mes amis, je n'ai qu'à arrive à bout de ce qu'on devait faire aujourd'hui. La journée est vraiment chargée. We've heard from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the official opposition, from Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, from FCM leaders, from our candidates for First Vice President, and you're still full of energy. That's actually an Ask the Expert session starting right now. At 5:30 Eastern Time, there are 2 regional caucus networks sessions for BC and for the Prairies and Territories. Remember, for all annual conference sessions, check the online program for details and how to join. Demain, une autre grosse journée nous attend. I'll see you all back here on the big screen at 9:30 a.m. Eastern for our 3rd political keynote, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Voting for FCM's first vice president is now open, and you have until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow morning to cast your ballot. Faites-vous une excellente soirée.